Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the BCP Planning Committee, taking place in the in Bournemouth Civic Centre. First of all, I'll pass on to the Democratic Services Officer to do the housekeeping rules and guidance.
Thank you. Just to note, this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the website for a minimum of 6 months. It may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this lies with the chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point along Bradley Road under the flyover. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
So the first thing is to introduce ourselves. I'll first of all ask all the councillor members of the committee to say their name and where they're councillor for, and also the officers who are present with us. So my name is Marion Lepedvin. I'm ward councillor for Newtown and Heatherlands in Poole, and I'm chairing this meeting.
Hello, I'm Paul Hilliard, councillor for Muddyford, Stampit and West Highcliffe, and vice chair of the planning committee.
Hello, councillor Felicity Rice, Oakdale Ward.
Get Tobblewoods. Peter Sidaway, Broadstone.
Gillian Martin, Boscombe West.
Sharon Carr-Brown, Queen's Park.
Michael Tarling, Christchurch Town.
Kate Salmon, Moordown.
Joe Clements, Penn Hill Ward.
Lawrence Williams, Littledown, Myford.
Cameron Adams, Kinson. Brian Hitchcock, Hamworthy.
David Flagg, Burton Grange.
That's the members of the committee, and now the officers. On my right.
Good morning, everybody. Sam Fox. I'm the Director of Planning and Destination.
Morning, everyone. I'm Simon Gould. I'm one of the DM managers.
Morning, Robert Third, Senior Solicitor.
Morning, Ruth Povey, Senior Conservation Officer.
Sophie Leon, Urban Design Officer.
Sorry, can I just get clarification what DM means?
Development Management, formerly Development Control.
And you've already heard from Jill Holyoke, who's the Democratic Services Officer, taking minutes and generally keeping it in order in this meeting. So, moving on to item 1 on the agenda, have we any apologies for absence?
Yes, we've received an apology from Councillor John Challoner, and for item 2 substitute members, Councillor Lawrence Williams is here for Councillor Challoner today.
Thank you. And have any members a declaration of interest about any of the items on this agenda? Items 1 and 2 to start with. Okay, we'll come on to the other one when we come to it after lunch. So, members, are you happy with the minutes of the meeting on the 19th of October, which have been circulated? Everybody happy? Any concerns, worries, queries? Doesn't look like it. Okay, thank you very much. I'll sign those in due course. Public issues. If with the applications, after the officer presentation on each application, we'll hear public speakers, followed by any ward councillors and other councillors who wish to speak, and then we'll move to members of the committee, who first of all will ask any questions about the presentation, any clarification that they feel is necessary, and then we'll move on to discussion and decision on that application. So the first application before us today is numbered 6A. It's Holland House, 20 Oxford Road. So I'll hand over to the case officer, who is Tom Hubbard, to tell us about it.
Thank you. Good morning, members.
Okay, so this is an application at Holland House, 20 Oxford Road in Bournemouth. It's a full planning application for the demolition of the existing office building and car park and erection of a building to provide 487 flats, including ancillary residence, gym, commercial space, accessible public realm, landscaping, servicing and car parking, ancillary plant and associated works. Holland House is in the Lansdowne area of Bournemouth. Lansdowne is part of the Bournemouth town centre area. It's a distinct business district which contains mostly office accommodation, university teaching buildings and student accommodation. Bournemouth Station is off to the north on the other side of St Paul's Road up here, and you've got the Wessex Way running down off to the northwest here. So it's a very sustainable and accessible location. This is an aerial view of the Lansdowne area taken from Google Maps. Although I'd estimate it's probably about 5 years old, so it's actually quite out of date with a number of buildings missing. There's been quite a lot of change in recent years. You've got new university buildings here and here, for example, with the new University Gateway building, and there's a student accommodation block here. You've got the Skyline student accommodation block over here. And then the Helm building. These are all sort of construction sites on this screen, but they've actually been built. So the Helm building is mentioned in the report. It's a mixture of office and residential accommodation. There's also schemes with planning consent on the two sites at the end of Holland House Road here. So you've got Waverley House on the corner for a similar height building to that proposed here. And then there's also a replacement building for Telecom House over here on Holland House Road. So this is another aerial view moved around from the west, so you get a different and closer view. Holland House is the red brick building here. And this shows you the direct neighbour context a bit better. In my report, I've gone through all the individual neighbouring properties. For reference, the main impact identified is to the 4-storey hostel here on St Paul's Lane, where there would be some daylight loss to the side-facing elevation here where there are bedrooms. There's also a slight impact to the Cranbourne House student accommodation, which is this block down here, because you've got the second tower of the proposed development in this part of the site here. The other buildings, so you've got the locally listed Avalon building here, which is mentioned in the report. The Bournemouth University Gateway building is now built here, and there's a car park in this part here. It's got the Skyline student accommodation block over here. There's some older office blocks between, and then more student accommodation. This is Oxford Point, this one. So this map shows you the heritage constraints referenced in the report. In terms of conservation areas, these are shown by the beige hatched areas on this map. You've got Dean Park Conservation Area, which is set around the listed former cricket ground. You've got Porchester Road off to the top here, just coming into view. You've got the East Cliff Conservation Area, which wraps around to the south and east, and then Old Christchurch Road Conservation Area down to the southwest. The pink squares are locally listed buildings, so they are the non-designated heritage assets in MPPF speak. The closest of those, again, the Avalon building here. The red squares are the listed buildings. You can see there aren't any directly adjacent to the site, but there are some in the wider area. You've got Bournemouth Station, the former law courts on Stafford Road, the old fire station on Holden House Road, for example. There is an impact to the setting of the Avalon building, as I've mentioned in the report. In terms of the designated heritage assets, I'm quite comfortable that the impact would not be harmful, because these conservation areas tend to be quite self-contained, with limited views out, for example. And where there are views, then the proposed development would be seen in the context of Lansdowne as a whole, so that's as a sort of separate and detached area of the town centre with a different character, which sits apart from the more historic areas. This shows where the site sits within the allocated tall buildings area in Lansdowne, which is supported by policy D5 of the town centre area action plan. So the current core of this tall buildings area is mainly along this block between Holdenhurst Road and Oxford Road. So the proposed building would sit broadly within that central cluster. So when you get down to the southern end, for example, around Christchurch Road, the buildings tend to be a bit lower, about 8 to 12 stories. So this shows a very similar outlined area, but this is the boundary of the Lansdowne employment area, which is supported by policy CS8 of the core strategy. So this is where the site sits within that area. I've gone into a lot of detail on this in my report in terms of the requirements of policy CS8 and the mix of uses. Essentially, while CS8 remains a current adopted policy, it could also be considered out of date. So ultimately, applicants have undertaken a site-specific viability assessment, which has determined that the policy compliance scheme isn't viable on this site. And then in addition to that, there's also the consideration of the fallback position where there is an extant prior approval consent to convert the existing office building to residential use, resulting in the loss of all the commercial use on the site. So here are some photos for context. Excuse me. This is the view on Oxford Road to the south of the site. So you've got the new student accommodation block known as Bailey Point here. The site is identified by the trees you can see here. This is a closer view of the existing building. You can see it's quite set back from the street compared to others, and it doesn't contribute much towards an active frontage. The existing pavement around the site is quite narrow, and this corner is where the new area of public open space will be located, with the retention of 2 of these trees and then planting some new ones within it. This is a side view of the building from St Paul's Place. You can see the Cranbourne House student accommodation block in the background there. This is a view of the rear of the site. There are some trees here that are to be removed and replaced. This is the entrance to the university car park here. This is a view from the northern side of Oxford Road, the other end. So this is the existing building, Holland House here. And then stepping slightly further back to the end of Oxford Road where it meets St Paul's Road, you've got the Avalon building on the right here and the Skyline student accommodation building on the left. And then moving round to the other side, you've got a view from Lansdowne Road where you can see Holland House in the gap between the new University Gateway building and Cranbourne House. There's an existing car park there. So moving on to some views of the proposed development. These views here are shown cumulative with other consented schemes that haven't currently been implemented, but they do represent a material consideration in this case. So on the top left, you've got a distant view across the town from the West Cliff area. So other schemes appear at a similar height here. So you've got the Glenfern Road car park scheme outlined in black there, and Waverley House in yellow. From Niverton Road at the border of the East Cliff Conservation Area down here, the scheme is shown in blue, so you can see it wouldn't have such a visible impact if these other consented schemes are built out. You've got Waverley House again in yellow and another scheme next door, 95 to 101 Holdenhurst Road, shown there in black. And then similarly from Holdenhurst Road across the other side, close to the station, you've got a full rendered view of the proposed development here. But it would appear as part of the cluster of tall buildings that's developing in this area. And again, other consented schemes are more prominent in this view. So these ones are probably the more prominent views of the proposal. The top left from St Paul's Road, close to the junction with Wessex Way, shows the proposed building in the context of the Avalon building. So you can see the relationship there, but they do remain sort of set apart. On the right here, you've got a view from Richmond Hill roundabout and showing the view from the Wessex Way. So this view, it will look quite tall in this perspective because it's closer than some of the other tall buildings in the Lansdowne area. So this will be one of the more significant views of the building. But equally, it's part of a sort of evolving corridor of tall buildings that you've got along the Wessex Way, going from Lansdowne up to Westbourne. And then, sorry, I missed one out there, Lansdowne Road. That's showing you a view from Lansdowne Road as you head south from Charminster. So again, it would be quite prominent here because it's closer than some of the other tall buildings in Lansdowne. And then there's a further more distant view of the development from Holdenhurst Road, much further back in the Springbourne area of the town. At the moment, the dominant view is of the Avalon building, as you can see on the right here. But the new development will also be introduced into this view off slightly to the left. The applicant submitted view doesn't really illustrate it that well, but you can see that sort of terminating view here. So moving on to the plans, this is the location plan showing the footprint of the new building. You can see it's a sort of horseshoe shape set around a new area of public open space to this southern corner. The site effectively occupies a whole street block, so it's got roads most of the way around it. This design helps also to get the daylight and sunlight into this central courtyard area from the south. This is an indicative site and ground floor plan. You can see the open space area again here. These are the 2 trees to be retained, and there's others to be planted in this area and also around the boundaries of the site. This area here wrapping around is the office co-working space. There's a cafe here which fronts onto Oxford Road, another small commercial unit here at the side, and a gym at the back, which all help to give some activity and surveillance to the street. Other ground floor areas are mostly bin and cycle storage and plant areas. There's a small communal cinema for residents. This pink area is the ground floor element of the cycle store. It's got some accessible cycle spaces here, and the communal Brompton bikes are stored in this area too. Then on the mezzanine level, there are flats around the outside of the building, and then this orange area in the middle is the rest of the cycle storage. So this shows a typical upper floor layout. There's a mix of studio, 1-bed, 2-bed and 3-bed flats set around a central courtyard area which has a green roof. Then this layout continues to the upper floors when the building then splits into 2 towers with a roof garden at the top of the rest of the building on level 12. Then at the top of the main tower, which is this one here, there are some internal and external communal spaces in this part of the building as well. So this is an elevation of the existing building. It's 8 stories in height and it's entirely formed of office space. And again, as per the report, there is an extant consent for conversion to residential use, which forms a material consideration. So this is the proposed elevation onto Oxford Road. The tallest element of the building is fronting Oxford Road, here with a secondary tower set back to the opposite corner on St Paul's Place. It might not be very clear on the screen for you, but the building is divided into horizontal bands with a white frame and then a second darker buff colour for the inset sections. Then at the top, you've got a darker crown feature of the building, giving a clear finish to the 2 main tower elements. The ground floor is mostly glazed to give a strong active frontage to the street. And then at the rear, the lower connecting sections are treated slightly differently. So you've got a white section here with the frame being less prominent to help break up the elevations. There's also some balconies on the lower floors to help articulate that. These are the side elevations to St Paul's Lane and St Paul's Place, which are the 2 side roads. This is an illustration of the proposed development onto Oxford Road, where the main tower will be the prominent feature. You can see the use of a colonnade feature is continued from the Bailey Point building here. It gives a wider footway onto Oxford Road. The open space area here replaces the greenery on this part of the site and provides a positive feature to Oxford Road, where there's currently little or no open space, and there isn't a very strong or inviting public realm. There are also highway improvements proposed to improve the pedestrian cycle environment around the site, such as narrowing these wide bellmouth junctions to the two side roads and increasing the pedestrian priority across these. In terms of the design, you can see the white frame that I was talking about, which gets narrower as you get to the top of the building. So there's these horizontal bands with about 6 floors between the frame at the lower end, and then that narrows to 3 floors at the top. And then you've got this strong crown element with the frame continuing up a bit further to give some glimpses of sky through the top. This gives an illustration of some of the detail and materials to be used in the scheme. The exterior will be formed of mostly concrete cladding, which will be designed to appear like natural stone, with the white frame and the buff-coloured inner sections. The crown will be a darker metal type cladding to provide more contrast and interest to that element. And again, you can see the balconies on the lower floors, which also increase the articulation. From the detail of the elevations, you can see that the building's frame and the inset sections are both sort of textured with a curved or fluted type profile. So it's considered this will provide interest and help it appear positive and high quality compared to, say, a completely flat facade. This slide shows some other schemes that I've referenced in my report, which are either consented or in the pipeline. So I've included these briefly for context. So these are all on Holdenhurst Road. This is 35 Holdenhurst Road, known as Telecom House. Then Waverley House, which is actually of a fairly similar height to the building proposed here, with it's about 9 or 10 metres lower. And then next to Waverley House is 95 to 101 Holdenhurst Road. So these two are both outline schemes. This is a full consent. So to summarise then, this is a relatively balanced proposal. In terms of the main issues, there's the matter of the principle of the uses. There is a conflict with policy CS8 because the application doesn't propose a mix of uses that is compliant with this policy. That policy favours commercial and employment uses over residential use, which is sort of the lower priority. However, it is recognised that this policy could be considered out of date with the Housing Council's housing supply situation. So there's two main factors which have allowed me to conclude that the mix of uses is acceptable here. So firstly, in terms of the fallback position, the consent to convert the existing building, which would result in the loss of the office space on the site. And then secondly, in terms of viability, the applicant's viability figures have been independently assessed with the conclusion that it would not be viable to provide more commercial space here. So those two factors, combined with sort of appeal history on sites in the area, most notably 37 to 39 Oxford Road, where the council lost an appeal a few years ago based on viability in policy CS8. So that is the Skyline building, which is 100% student accommodation. I've also had regard to the MPPF, which says a paragraph 122 that planning policies should be reviewed every 5 years to stay up to date. And also where there's no reasonable prospect of an allocated use coming forward, then alternative uses for which there is a need should be supported. So in this case, that's the substantial housing provision that this provides, given the council's 5-year housing land supply situation. Then in terms of the scale of the building, it will be tall, but it will be part of an involving tall buildings cluster in this part of the town. There are some views where it's quite prominent, but I haven't considered that would be harmful overall because it's an expected location for tall buildings. It's quite a distinct area, and there are other consented schemes that are not that different in terms of the scale. We've worked on the design and materials throughout the process to ensure that it will have a high quality appearance. There are some outstanding heritage concerns from the heritage officer about the impact on the views from the conservation areas, but I'm reasonably satisfied myself that they're quite self-contained and the development would not be materially harmful in that respect. The one identified impact is to the locally listed Avalon building, though this is not a listed building, so not a designated heritage asset. In terms of impact on neighbours and living conditions for occupants, this development would actually be better than quite a lot of the other schemes in the area, mainly because it benefits from a street frontage all the way around, giving it a bit more space. The living conditions are probably better than many of the other blocks, for example, those that sit in the Oxford Road and Holland House Road block, because those buildings back onto each other at quite close distance. There is a shortfall of cycle parking compared to the BCP parking standards document, but the development would still provide in the region of 500 cycle spaces in a large secure store, as well as providing a shared use scheme for residents and also contributing towards a public bike scheme in the street adjacent to the site. You've also got regard to the fact that the site's in a highly sustainable location with easy alternative sustainable travel methods, including walking and public transport. There are multiple public benefits to the scheme in terms of the significant contribution towards local housing need with nearly 500 dwellings. There have been letters of support, including from the university, stating that it would help to increase the retention of graduates and young professionals in the area. The increased population will help the vitality and viability of this part of the town centre. So you've got a resident population helping businesses and employers. There are financial contributions towards highway and public realm improvements, and the scheme would also provide this area of public open space on the site. These elements will significantly improve the public realm and environment on Oxford Road, which currently has a relatively narrow footway, as I said, and it doesn't provide a particularly pleasant environment for pedestrians. So overall, I've weighed all these elements in the balance, and I've recommended approval of the application as set out in the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Now we move on to representations and speakers from the public. So could we know who they are, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are no objectors registered. There are 2 speakers in support of the application. First, Joe Cowan, followed by Matthew Mannering, if you'd like to come forward. Thanks.
Hello everyone, my name is Jo Cowan and I'm the architect of the scheme working alongside Marchmont and Peveril on bringing this forward. I think in the first instance, it's a big thank you to the case officers and the design officers, Sophie and Tom. It's been a really good process over the last year working this through. When we ultimately look at any site, we are effectively looking at everything from a regeneration point of view, and that's what we do. We are hello. You have to give me 10 more seconds. But no, we approach every site from a regeneration point of view. Ultimately, buildings and places are about people and how they approach them and how they come to them. Build to rent is a really lovely way of bringing homes forward because you have long-term invested developers who want to curate the place, who want to make it an amazing place to live because they're going to earn and hold that long term. So we're looking really at high quality design, but it's got to be rooted in placemaking. It's got to be about the community and it's got to serve and add to the urban context. Next slide, please. Ultimately, that starts from the ground level. People really experience buildings and places within those first few stories rather than ultimately the longer views. And actually, we were very lucky here in working with a developer who allowed us on day one to say, this is a very unforgiving environment. It feels very hard. All developments around it come almost as close to that street frontage. And so in the first instance, we said, let's give effectively 1,000 square meters at ground level and let's create a public space. Let's look at a landscape-led approach. The activation on all sites is really important. It's difficult to achieve with all the requirements that you have, but ultimately we've looked at curating both commercial and co-working space, a cafe space, shop space, gym, different types of entrances to the building, so that really when people come up, they actually feel that they have an interaction with it, whether you're inside that building or outside. And the landscape-led design and the work we've done with the tree offices has been really important in actually how do we cultivate that from day one. Next slide, please. It's very difficult in one slide to be able to explain actually the huge number of iterations in terms of the design process we've gone through. But ultimately where we rested was looking at 1/4 of the site, looking at the tallest element, a marker building, which sat actually nestled in the southwest corner, as close to the other taller buildings within the overall Lansdowne area. Then offsetting that with the second tower, which gives it more of its setting, so it contextualizes it, and then effectively a linking block at level 12 on the building. It's very important to look at the orientation. You want your public spaces, you want your building to open up to the south to really get that light penetration. And this is a building that's designed really in 3 ways, both from a ground point of view, that's the colonnades and it's that interaction, then a middle section of the building, and then actually that crown element. When you are dealing with tall buildings, you need to think actually, how do they feel interesting? Seeing something isn't bad, but you need to be looking at something that's high quality and contributes. Next slide, please. There's been a huge amount of work done on the facades, and these are a few of the images, and a lot of that has come through the work that we've done primarily with Sophie. The building started, like much of building that area, as an aluminium clad building, but we actually started to look at this more and think more about how could we go for a masonry led solution, and how could we use different colors and a series of scallops or forms to actually make it something that's very interesting. And what does it feel like when you're standing at ground level and looking up? We want people to look and think that that's interesting. That's a building I'd like to live in. And that's really important. Architecture has to feel effectively warm. It has to feel soft and it has to feel approachable. Next slide, please. And ultimately, this is probably the main CGI that everyone's looked at. There's a huge amount of amenity in this building for both the residents and also for those people who are approaching and coming close to the building. I'm going to stop there because Tom's given such a good explanation and I need to give Matt an opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Matthew Mannering. I'm the agent. I'm Matthew Mannering and I'm the agent for the planning application. The applicant has been committed to delivering this development from the very outset. Despite the difficult economic climate recently and the very significant build cost issues, the applicant has remained committed to the original objective of creating high quality, professionally managed homes for, amongst others, young people starting out in the world of work. We know from speaking to local employers how difficult it is for those entering into the workplace finding the right homes, and this scheme seeks to deliver on those objectives. At the strategic planning level, the scheme will also make a very significant contribution to improving the delivery of new housing. In fact, this single scheme will deliver more than double the number of new homes than was delivered in the whole of Bournemouth in 21-22. It will significantly improve 5-year housing land supply and enable progress towards the council meeting the government's housing delivery test, issues dealt with in the case officer's report in paragraph 64. The scheme has received an extremely low level of objection, and we hope that you will be in a position to support this high quality development and allow the scheme to move forward into delivering new homes for Bournemouth. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to return to your places? So now we move on to questions for members of the committee. I'm going to take chair's privilege and start because I've got a few questions I would like to ask. Obviously, this is to Mr. Hubbard, who is still with us. You said in your presentation that it's not viable to provide more commercial space in line with CS8 or more in line with CS8. Can you explain why, please?
Yes, so the applicant submitted a viability assessment, which has been independently assessed by the district valuation service that the council use for such assessments. And in their initial assessment, they provided two scenarios, one which was the current scheme with the ground floor area of commercial space. And then they tested a second scenario, which increased the amount of office floor space to another floor or two of office space. I can't recall the exact figure, but it was a more meaningful amount. And the outcome of that was that it was significantly less viable, about £6 or £7 million less viable. And then, so logically following the ultimate conclusion that this scheme before you is not viable in terms of the level of profit to provide any affordable housing or any increased commercial space, then that second tested scenario means that they have demonstrated that providing more commercial space means it's even less viable, if that makes sense.
Sort of. I've got other questions on different tacks. Does the cinema, which you said was for residents only, what about the gym? Are these going to be available to the general public?
It might be a question for the applicants. I can't recall off the top of my head. It certainly has a street frontage now, whereas originally it didn't. So I'm not sure on that answer of that, actually. Don't know if the applicant has the answer.
Yeah. Perhaps we can answer, since we've got the applicant or the agent here, perhaps they can answer for, this is not usual practice, but on this occasion, get it from the horse's mouth is probably better.
No, the gym space is intended and scaled to be for the use of the residents living within the development rather than being a larger public facility.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Perhaps you better stay there just in case. My next question is about the amenity space. Level 12 with this roof garden, Mr. Hubbard, is that available for residents or not?
Yes, it's intended for use by all the residents, yes.
Thank you. I've got a supplementary question from a fellow member about what about non-residents? Can they access it?
I wouldn't have thought it would be available for non-residents. It's up on the 12th floor. You'd have to go through the main residential blocks. I think it's intended just as a private amenity space for residents.
The other question, which I suppose is partly answered by your answer to the first question, is why is it necessary for the building to be so tall? I mean, I know it's other buildings in the area have permission, but none of them have been built to be approaching that height. This would be the highest so far agreed, if we do agree it. What's wrong with a building of, say, 20 stories? Why has it got to be 30?
Well, 30 stories is the proposal that has been put to us. So we have to consider that scheme for 30 stories on its merits. As I say, I've been through all the relevant views of the proposed building. In some views, it will stand out. In other views, it won't stand out, depending on where you are and what other intervening buildings there are. But I thought that it was sort of around the right height that the site could take. The applicants also went through a design review panel process, and the outcome of that was that the design review panel were not overly concerned about the height. They said it was around sort of the maximum that the site could accommodate, but they weren't overly concerned about it. They did raise some points about our sort of tall buildings policy, that although it encourages tall buildings in this area, it doesn't sort of give any further steer onto sort of upper limits. But in light of other schemes coming forward in the town, and the location of this one and the sort of full assessment that we've done on the views and the impacts, I've considered it's acceptable.
I probably didn't phrase my question as I should have. It's more on the viability side.
Okay. I'm not sure that I can fully answer that. I mean, the applicants have put in a 30-storey scheme here. They consider that it's deliverable. I think based on the viability assessment that's come out of this, that says it's not viable in terms of the profit level to provide any additional commercial space or affordable housing, that they've obviously considered this is the optimum in terms of the number of units that they need to make it deliverable.
Thank you. Mr. Fox wants to come in on this one.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for clarifying that. We've got to be really careful here, Chair, in that we have to consider the application in front of us and not kind of speculate about what might be acceptable or otherwise of a different scheme, an amended scheme. The application is supported, as Tom says, by a viability assessment, and that's the basis on which Tom has come forward with the recommendation.
Thank you. I admit it was a rather cheeky question, but it is a concern to me, you know, to know why that is considered the optimum height for viability and all other reasons.
Perhaps members might find it helpful for us to have a member training session on not this minute, but on tall buildings and viability of them, because I think that would be quite helpful to aid the committee's consideration of applications such as this in future. Is that something we can take away?
Good suggestion. Right. Back to the matter in hand. That's all my questions. So other people has anyone else got questions? I think I saw Councillor Clements first, but there's a forest of hands.
Yeah, am I to understand that there is absolutely no car parking provision at all?
There's thank you. Yeah, there's one or two spaces shown on the site for sort of delivery purposes, and there's also some parking bays on the street. I don't think I've got a plan that shows that. There are some car club bays and some disabled parking bays on Oxford Road and St Paul's Place.
Another one?
Another one, please, yeah. Also, there was mention of trees being removed and being replaced. I don't understand, if they're healthy trees, why they have to be taken away and then replaced with different trees. Is there a reason for that?
So the two trees that are being retained are in this part of the site here. There are trees along Oxford Road frontage and there are trees along this rear section of the site here. I think it's mainly to do with the fact that the construction process and the proximity of the building to the trees meant that they wouldn't have been possible to retain. So they will be replaced once construction is complete and with new species that are appropriate for the space available on the site.
Thank you. The next hand I saw, because it's so close, probably, is Councillor Salmon. Did you? Oh, I thought you did. Right. Back to hands then. There was some over here. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Just one point. I did look through the report and it said that the fire people were happy with it, you know, from a safety point of view, but it is actually quite a height, like you mentioned. In the event of it catching fire, would the local fire brigade be able to deal with that height of building?
Mr. Hubbard?
Yes, as you say, the height of the building means that we have to consult the health and safety executive. They have responded to say that the principle of the design of the building is acceptable. It has been designed to meet all the fire safety regulations, which are mainly covered by the building regulations. They would have ensured that they've got sufficient sort of stair cores, access, emergency access and exits. And I imagine they'll probably use a sprinkler system, but it's a bit beyond the sort of planning assessment. In that regard, it's more covered by the building regulations.
Any more? There were other hands. Councillor Rice.
Yes, with regards to the pedestrian priority that you were talking about in the two side roads, I would like more information about why continuous or whether continuous footways were considered across those two small side roads, since they don't they're not that busy.
Yes, sorry, I haven't got a plan that shows it, but as part of the section 278 works, which are the works that the applicant will undertake on the highway, there's a agreement in the section 106 for them to enter into this section 278 agreement. They will do works to the highway, which includes, and we agree that these side roads here, they've got quite they're very wide junctions with big sort of bell mouth junctions, and the footway is not very wide around here. So as part of those works, yes, we are planning to install a sort of raised table across these, straighten out the junction and give pedestrians a better priority. And we thought that was necessary given the sort of already the level of footfall in the area and the increased amount of trips that this development will add to Oxford Road as well.
You've got a supplementary. Okay.
So can you tell me specifically whether continuous footways were considered for here? Because raised tables do not give priority for a child. So, for example, if a child is walking across there and there's a raised table and the child is killed by somebody driving their car at them, then that child will be considered at fault. Whereas if there's a continuous footway, the child has complete priority and it will be the driver that will be at fault and has to take responsibility. And that's more appropriate for the developmental ability of the child. So I'm just wondering specifically about continuous footways.
I'm not sure that it's a relevant question, because as I keep being told, we have to consider the plans as they are before us without continuous footway. So we have to consider it on the merits of the case as presented to us.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering whether it was considered, but also whether it seems to be that it's part of in the documentation, it says that there'll be detailed plans submitted regarding the treatment to those road surfaces. So I'm wondering also whether legally we can consider whether we can add a condition onto this to say, please, can we look at continuous footways as opposed to just raised tables?
Is that appropriate? A condition to in those sort of terms? It's not. It's
clarification as to whether it's possible or not.
Right. Mr. Hubbard, can you answer that one?
Whether it might be useful to bring in the highways officer at this point on the difference between the two types of footway.
Thank you. Have we got Mr. Smith with us, or who is it? Mr. Kemp.
Mr. Kemp.
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, Chair. Yes, no, as part of the 278 works that the applicant has agreed, it will indeed be a tightening of the radii on the junctions at St Paul's Place and St Paul's Lane, and that will form a continuous footway at both junctions. Now that has been agreed with a parallel crossing fronting the development across Oxford Road as well. And that will be all undertaken, like I said, in the 278 works to our specification and satisfaction at the time, for which we will supervise the works and ensure they are to our standard.
Thank you. Councillor Carl Brown, you had a question.
First of all, I'd like to register my frustration at no affordable housing yet again, but we've been over the viability.
That's not a question. That comes in the comments. I'm sure you will not be alone in saying that, but we will wait and see.
Because I'm saying that we've covered it with your commercial viability question. Therefore, I'm not asking that question. That's where I was going with that. I am concerned about daylight. I'm concerned about daylight for the building itself, but also the overshadowing of the other buildings. And I'm interested in the an explanation, please, of the, I don't know, the sort of mental gymnastics, the way that some things are considered to be, yes, it's a detriment, but it's okay. How do we get to that conclusion, please? What's the thinking? Sorry, both for the building itself and the ones it overshadows.
Mr. Hubbard?
Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a tricky question to answer. Ultimately, you have to look at the overall impact. So if you've got a scheme with 500 flats and maybe, a dozen of them are sort of lower quality, well then overall the impact is considered acceptable, albeit with some that are not quite so good in terms of daylight, because it's very difficult on these bigger schemes in a high density area surrounded by other tall buildings to achieve a situation where all of the flats are completely perfect in terms of daylight. So in this case, so I'm talking about the living conditions for the future occupants at the moment. When you look at the layout, you've got flats set around this internal courtyard and you've got flats set around the outside. So a lot of them, apart from those on the corners, are sort of single aspect units. But when you look at the overall orientation of that, you've got the sunlight coming in from the south, which generally helps the situation. And then during the application process, we've done some work with the applicant. They've increased the width of this courtyard to try and help. And they've also sort of adjusted some of the units. For example, this was 2 units to start with. Now it's 1 with a sort of dual aspect. So we've tried to improve that during the process as much as we can, although you still end up with some, for example, some of these 1-bed or studio units where they've got quite a deep plan form and then you're trying to get light in. But ultimately, overall, it was considered acceptable. So then similarly with the neighbouring properties, obviously it's surrounded by quite a few buildings. We've got a very detailed daylight and sunlight assessment looking at every window on every surrounding building, basically, which identifies that, yes, this building will have an impact at certain times in terms of shading and daylight. Mainly, as I said, there's an impact to this hostel here because it's much lower. But then you have to look at the the room types, what are the rooms used for? The Building Research Establishment Guidelines, the BRE, suggests that sort of bedrooms are of lesser importance than living rooms because you probably, I guess, in them mostly at night rather than your main living space. So those are in the hostel are mostly bedrooms. There was also temporary accommodation. Much of this is student accommodation as well and offices. So it's not someone's sort of permanent place of residence. So there's a number of factors really that we take into account. And in this particular area, when you look at some of the other buildings, some of these relationships down here are much closer. For example, yeah, this one, Oxford Point and Lansdowne Point and the Helm and Purbeck House. I don't know if I've got anything that shows it particularly, but going back, you can see the back-to-back relationships. Some of these relationships, it is a high density area where you would probably accept slightly lower standards in some cases. I hope that's answered it. But if you need further clarification, I can try.
Thank you, Mr. Hubbard. Mr. Gould wants to come in on this.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a really great question, actually, Councillor, and you're really getting to the nub of it, really, that what's our role as planning officers? And when we look at a scheme like this, there's a whole host of issues. And what you do as an officer, you work through each of those issues and you draw a conclusion. And some issues you'll conclude are acceptable, a benefit, and then other issues where there's a shortcoming. So, for instance, in this, it's acknowledged that the scheme falls short of complying with CS8 in terms of the mix of the uses. What I like to do as an officer myself is, in my mind, you have like a set of scales. So on the one side, you put the positive aspects of the scheme, and then the other side, you put the negative. And then what you do at the end is when you get to the planning balance section, which starts at paragraph 221 of the report, you then start to add weight to those issues. So, for instance, there's an acknowledgement, and Tom's just talked about the fact that some of the rooms, a small percentage of them, might suffer from slightly substandard light levels. In the context of the overall scheme, does that trip it up? And what the officers have concluded here is that we acknowledge the fact that it's a slight shortcoming of the scheme, but we're going to give limited weight to that because in the grand scheme of everything, when you're putting it into the balance. So that's exactly what the report's trying to do. It's balancing out those issues and then attaching weight to them. And, in this instance, the fact that the scheme will deliver a significant amount of housing in a highly sustainable location in an area where there's an acknowledged, a shortfall in terms of housing land supply, the weight is ultimately sort of coming down on the side of supporting. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Thank you very much. I was ticking off all the lists of questions that I did want to ask and a whole load that I didn't want to ask as well. So thank you, Councillor Garbrand. I wasn't about to explode, but I can feel the prickles in the room. My first one is related to paragraph 53, which is the flexible office space and the operation of it. And I know it's conditioned on condition 19 or proposed to be conditioned on condition 19. The space concerned is obviously in the plans at the moment is shown as a sort of fairly open space. I just wanted a further clarification on how it's going to be operated. That as set up, I think we're all aware post-COVID that a lot of us are now working in a different. All those of us that work in sort of office roles tend to be working in a much different position than we were pre-COVID. But it mentions in paragraph 53 that this space is improved with areas that could potentially be let to small businesses or users, or equally used as quiet, bookable or informal touchdown areas for individuals. I've worked in a number of these flexible spaces before and providers. Can I just inquire whether the condition 19 addresses the issue? My concerns would be that this space is actually used as flexible working space and is not reassigned at some point in the future. Can I just ask the question that what is the intention of this space? A bit more clarity on that. Thank you.
Mr. Hubbard.
Thank you. I'm just having a look at the condition. Bear with me. Well, to go back to the start of the process, when this application was first submitted, you can see that this area on the plan is segregated with lobbies and doors. When it first came in, it was one continuous open plan area, and I had concerns that it was essentially a few desks within a sort of residential lobby. You'd have residents coming through, going through to the stair cores and that sort of thing. So it has been improved during the process. Now that they've sort of compartmentalized these areas, they are separated off now with different lobby areas. So that gives the opportunity to use them properly as sort of office space. The condition just says that it has to be used as office space, but if members thought it was appropriate, then you could sort of build in more of a management statement, perhaps, to be submitted to demonstrate how that will operate. That is an option.
Thank you. Councillor Tarling.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hubbard. And yes, I take your advice on that point about the condition being. I have a second question, and it was regarding paragraph 194. It mentions 68.4% cycling provision or cycling storage allowed. And also further on about condition 30, mentioned in condition 33 about folding bikes. It also mentions elsewhere in your report about the use of barrel bikes. As a reasonably keen cyclist, not as keen as some of the members here, how is the allocation of the cycling storage supposed to be if everybody wants a bike? I'm not sure, I'm assuming everybody does, but obviously our supplement SPD on transport, we've set out some standards, but there's obviously a derogation being sought here against that, the SPD. Could you clarify further on that?
Mr. Hubbard?
Yeah, so yeah, it's acknowledged that it is below the requirements of the parking SPD, because the SPD requires one cycle space per bedroom in the development, but it's actually been worked out in this case per unit. So you've got roughly 500 cycle spaces compared to, I think, just under 800 that would be required. To mitigate that, yes, the applicants have tried to give us alternative options, including that sort of folding bike scheme. So there's 12 of those for residents, and a condition to ensure that those are provided. And they've also will be making a contribution through the Section 106 agreement to put a one of the council barrel bike areas on the street in St Paul's Place. So that gives other options. But yeah, you can't. Yeah, so it's below in terms of the provision of resident cycle storage. But you can see that this area on the ground floor is cycle store, and this area on the mezzanine is cycle store. If they were to provide the full 800, it would probably require the whole of this floor to put those in. So the applicants have not wanted to take up any more space in the building with cycle storage. It's quite difficult on these sort of intensive high density town centre schemes because the cycle stores, when they're policy compliant with Sheffield standards, they do take up a lot of space. So it's one of those issues that I've weighed up in the balance again, that 500 spaces is a reasonable provision given the amount of space it takes up. and I've concluded that it doesn't create harm overall.
Councillor Tarling, happy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Holland. Yeah, I agree. It's a pragmatic approach to an SPD, which doesn't necessarily envisage, developments of this size. And I think it probably is a reasonable approach today. Thank you.
So, any more questions? Vice Chair.
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Hilliard.
It's regarding the town centre area action plan. It's probably more relevant for the heritage and or the urban design, but obviously the action plan and then the tall buildings policy is dated 2013, and since then obviously buildings have gone up. I don't know when the home life building was designated, but again, time other buildings are going to be surpassing that if they get built out. So it's the interpretation of the tall, and again the designation of a Lansdowne tall buildings area, how you previously balanced that against the conservation areas which are all around it. And then similarly, the tall buildings policy isn't specific, but again, what is a tall building? How does that get debated and assessed? Thank you.
So I'm not sure, Mr. Hubbard probably initially, but maybe the other officers after that.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite clear what the question
it's
is.
really, yeah, just really how the policy of tall buildings in that Lansdowne area is decided on in 2013. Tall buildings have come forward, the conservation and the listed buildings, the local listed buildings have been around, but tall buildings have been allowed. So it's how that tall buildings policy works against the conservation areas and listed buildings, and then also confirmation of the tall buildings policy is not specific about what a tall building is, how you make that designation of how tall is a tall building. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So, well, there's always been tall buildings in the Lansdowne area. When the town centre area action plan was developed, it's likely that it was considered an appropriate location for tall buildings because of the character of that area as it already was. But then policy D5 does have a number of criteria that you still have to follow when you're looking at a tall building, and that includes that it has to have a positive relationship with the historic context. So you still, it doesn't mean that tall buildings are automatically acceptable. You still have to go through the process of assessing the impact of that building and whether it is acceptable in terms of the impact on the character of the area and surrounding heritage assets.
I think Mr. Gould has something to add.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hopefully I can add a little bit further to Councillor Hilliard's question. I think that the first thing to note is that the hierarchy of the local plan documents in the Bournemouth area as it currently stands. So the area action plan, which has specific tall buildings policy, is a document that kind of sits slightly below the core strategy. Now, the core strategy was adopted in 2012, I think, and this document, the area action plan, follows on from that about a year or so later. Both of those documents in there, as they went through the sort of formulation process and leading up to adoption, would have to show that they comply with the NPPF. So I think to put that into some sort of hierarchical status order. So what the area action plan does is it builds on the work of the core strategy in a bit more detail, covering specifically Bournemouth Town Centre. I think the other point to raise is that the tall buildings policy, which is D5 of the area action plan, and D4, which is design quality, they are both policies which are heavily stooped in design principles. And there is a view sometimes, mainly from applicants, that they would try to undermine the validity of a policy because it's 10 years old. What we often find is actually we get a lot of support on appeals when it's a design related policy, because design principles are well established and they span significant generations. So you know, good urban design, good design practices is well established. So actually, whilst you might have a policy which is, you know, 10 years old and things are moving on in an area, actually the credentials that undermine that policy are still very much valid in the modern climate. So I hope that goes some way to also answering.
It does, but I think if it can bring the heritage officer, because it's again the conflict that this area is designated, but it's right in the middle of about 4 or 5 conservation areas and listed building. It's just again how actually it's clear the design, and every case is looked at separately. But the fact is that it leaves it open for big buildings, and there are conservation areas, and it just seems like a conflict. But just to clear,
yeah, I think one of the points I didn't also come back on, and I will answer that question as well, Councillor, is you asked about what is a tall building, and again in the area action plan in section 3.7 on page 33, 3.7.3 to be precise, it talks about the criteria that define tall buildings, and there's 3 really: essentially substantially taller than their neighbours, significantly change the skyline, and or are taller than 6 commercial stories or equivalent. So that's your starting point for what constitutes a tall building. In terms of, I think what's important to note here is that through that local plan, the area action plan adoption process, it was deemed acceptable to have a tall buildings area in the Lansdowne. And the knowledge would have been there that there are conservation areas relatively close. I think the Lansdowne's it sits on a bit of a plateau actually, and it's actually quite surprising that, you know, you don't get a significant amount of views of some of those buildings as you move, not a huge amount of area. Now I know that, you know, there are some views, and Mr. Hubbard has outlined those from areas like the West Cliff, and you will get those occasional views, and you will get occasional views, for instance, if you were in the Dean Park conservation area. But by and large, most of those conservation areas, like Dean Park and Porchester, which are arguably the closer ones, are more self-contained. It's not to say there's no views out of there, but actually the character and feel you have when you're in those conservation areas is more about the elements that make those areas special, sort of the trees, the sylvan setting, the sort of close sort of knit environment that you get. You've also got East Cliff Conservation Area, obviously, you know, more to the south, and you've got a lot of the rest of the Lansdowne that sort of intervenes between that. So I think the important point is the starting point here is that actually the local plan acknowledges this is an area for tall buildings, and as part of that thought process that went through the adoption, there would have had to have been an acknowledgement there are conservation areas nearby.
Oh, that's perfect. That sets the scene. Thanks.
So does the heritage or design officer want to come in at this stage?
Yeah, I think it might be helpful if we perhaps both came back on that. I thought my colleague in urban design can correct me if I'm wrong. Is it the AAP that says a tall building is over 6 stories? So I wonder if at that time we really envisaged the heights that we're now getting in the Lansdowne. You know, that it's not the most up-to-date guidance, but the most up-to-date guidance that's just been drafted, and it's not public yet. But that's part of the emerging local plan, and then we'll have more. We'll be more informed about what we want for the Lansdowne, but we haven't got that at the moment. We've got the current policies, and this will be the tallest building in Bournemouth. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Sophie.
I mean, I think it's, you know, the Lansdowne is well established as a tall buildings area. I think it's right that it should be. It's, you know, flat topography, it's in a highly sustainable location, and the character of it does lend itself to that in many ways. I think I just wanted to point out one thing that the design panel did raise on this. They said the area action plan identifies the area as a tall buildings area. The panel was unclear what this implied for actual heights on actual sites. Are tall buildings to form a gradient to the centre or to one of the peripheries? How many stories are acceptable? Do certain uses justify height more than others? In the absence of such guidance, we found it hard to give a view on the heights you propose. In fact, there is a risk that a laxity of guidance is allowing a competition for height to develop, with numerous schemes wanting to outdo others to the detriment of Bournemouth and its skyline. So as they say, our current guidance doesn't identify sort of a centres where the cluster should be. The existing tallest buildings are on Holland House Road, and that's where the taller approvals are. But we don't have any current guidance on that.
Thank you. Councillor Rice and then Councillor Carl-Brown.
Yeah, it looks as if there's a water feature marked in the public space. I was just wondering whether that is a play feature, and how that's going to be maintained.
Yes, it does show a sort of water fountain feature in the centre here. I don't have any details on maintenance, but yeah, I imagine it would be a play feature. Yeah.
Yeah, I can come back on that. I'm just wondering whether we can condition that it's a play feature, like a water feature that's a fountain that children cannot play in is very different from water fountains that children can run around in. And you get a lot more footfall if you have a specific play area. So I'm just concerned that that will fall by the wayside if we don't ensure.
I think maybe that hold that ready for the debate, because depending on what we say in the debate, it may be a point then to think about another condition. Mr. Gould.
Thank you, Chair. You've got conditions 11 and 12, and again, Chair, advise me if this is left for, following the debate, but there would be scope within some of the conditions if members were minded to insist on having a interactive play water feature to build something into the relevant conditions. Given the location, I think you'd also probably want to exercise some caution about the desirability of having a play feature there relative to a fairly busy road. I think that would probably need a more informed discussion in due course. But in theory, Chair, you have the scope within the conditions to build something in if you wanted it.
Thank you. Councillor Carl-Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions, if that's okay.
That's okay.
So the first is, I'm back to the elements. The wind worries me as well as the daylight. And having been in a few cities with high density of high but tall buildings, you do get wind tunnels. And I was wondering what assessments have been made around that, and also particularly for the planting on floor 12 for the roof garden. I was just interested in what assessments have been made for that being appropriate as well, given there will be wind tunnels created. I assume, I could be wrong.
Yes, I have a handy slide anticipating this might come up. The applicants have submitted a wind and microclimate report from a sort of professional company who have done some sort of proper wind testing in a wind tunnel with a sort of full model of the proposed development, as you can see on the left here. So it's a very detailed report that had led to some recommendations and mitigation measures. Primarily, so there's sort of two real impacts. There's those roof terraces and sort of living conditions for residents, and then the impact on people on the street. So in terms of on the street, that had led to some changes to the landscaping and the introduction of some sort of canopies at ground floor level that you can see here. So those sort of downdrafts get dissipated, and then in terms of the roof gardens, again, there have been some mitigation measures in terms of screens and planting to overcome any concerns about wind. And we've had the report assessed by our own independent consultants on this, who have concluded that the wind mitigation measures are acceptable. There's quite a lot of toing and froing between the 2 consultants on this, and we've come to an acceptable scheme with the mitigation measures. There were, for example, in the original submitted scheme, balconies sort of higher up the building. They've been taken away. So there have been other changes, and we are content now that the impact of wind will be mitigated in an acceptable manner.
Thank you. My next question was actually following up on the bicycles. Paragraph 180, part of the mitigation is the on-site Brompton cycle hire and things like that. And I just wondered, where has this worked as effective mitigation, please, in the country?
I'm afraid I'm not aware of any other examples, but I thought it was quite a good idea to provide that extra capacity for residents who might not want to own a bike and just need occasional use of one. I thought it was quite a positive element of the scheme.
Before we go on to another question, does the Transport Officer have any thoughts on this?
Thank you, Chair. I do believe that it is quite commonplace in some of the larger cities within the country. However, in regards to the Highway Authority's assessment of this application, obviously we have recommended refusal on the basis of a shortfall in residential spaces. So although that such schemes can be useful, and this is on offer alongside the Beryl bike scheme and supporting infrastructure, we obviously give it limited weight as to how much mitigation it provides for the level of shortfall associated with the development. However, obviously, the case officer explained the consideration and the balanced consideration overall for the scheme as a whole.
Thank you. And question 3?
Thank you. And paragraph 192, the LC WIP improvements are set at, I mean, it says estimated at 8 million in 2021 prices. I assume that will be updated to 2023 prices. Or have I fundamentally misunderstood something?
I do believe that reference was made for a previous application in the surrounding area where we sought a proportional contribution. Now, obviously, that will have all changed, and when we looked at this based on the trip generation, we have set improvement prices that the applicant has agreed to. A couple of examples of these, the wider LC WIP improvements include the Madeira Road improvements and improvements at St Paul's Road, and that's on top of the 278 infrastructure highways works that the applicant has agreed to undertake.
So they were listed as 2021 prices because this happened in 2021. I'm sorry, I've clearly misunderstood something here. There was a lot of reading.
No, that's all right. All the costs have been price indexed to current costs. So all the costs that we've agreed with the applicant are of 2023 prices.
Okay, I think, I was just going to say, I think we've given these questions a good airing, and it's time we've moved on to debate. Okay, Councillor Rice, but please, can we make this the last one? Because we really need to move on to debate.
So in the climate change paragraph at 208, it says that there have been no quantifiable details provided, and then I couldn't see anything in the conditions. I was just wondering about the energy uses of the building.
Condition 17 requires sort of more information on this. They had submitted a sustainability and energy statement with their report. It does go into quite a bit of detail. It just doesn't commit to any specifics. They talk about using solar PV on the roof, as well as air source heat pumps, and also a sort of general strategy for lean energy use with mechanical ventilation to help sort of recycle warm air through the building, use of sort of good quality materials and insulation, and sort of passive heating from the sun, and those sort of things. So that condition is there to just sort of sign off the final strategy, as it were, when they've actually know exactly how they're going to deal with those elements.
Okay, so they will have to provide information that ticks off the 10% renewable energy. Okay.
Okay, so we're going to move on to debate now. So if the agent would resume his seat, please. Thank you for your patience. I didn't know whether we'd need you again or not. So we move on to the debate. Who would like to set the ball rolling? Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to commend Mr. Holland on a very detailed report. And I know it takes a lot of reading, but I felt we covered a lot of things, and I think that our questions are quite limited on this one, on that basis. I think the first point to make note is this is quite different, the fact that it's in the Lansdowne and it is a tall building, and we need to think rather than town dwellers or village dwellers like city dwellers in this, and it's a different way of thinking. And if you go to any large modern city and the type of housing options available, that's what we're looking at here. And I think the design standards that we're trying to create here is really a city village in the town of Bournemouth in Lansdowne. So it's a different way of thinking in my mind. Regarding some of the comments on tall buildings, for me, it's not tall enough. I think, you know, we could probably do with a shard or something in the Lansdowne to make a real signature for Bournemouth. And it's not brutal enough for me. All this nice coloured concrete, I love grey concrete. I think it could be a lot more brutal in its appearance than it currently is. However, I acknowledge that my views are fairly maybe a bit niche when it comes to brutalism in architecture, and that's why I'm not an architect. I'm an engineer. Bearing that in mind and trying to think of what all the architects have said to me over my career, I'd like to commend the architects on the way that this design has developed as well. I can see that it's addressed the scale, it's addressed the issues with the crown on the building, and also breaking up the vertical elements into the reduced boxes to give that optical illusion of compressing the building. So it's sitting very gentle in the space. Also, Lansdowne over the last 10-15 years developed into a city feel, and the city streets and city boulevard cityscape as well. I think that it's lent itself very much this application to this. Regarding CS8, CS8 is out of date. I've put down. I know we have to still apply it, but since COVID, I think we've all become used to using Teams, and the office environment has meant that, as mentioned quite clearly in the report, the demand for the office space that was available in the previous building, the building's proposed to come down, of course, is not required. And there's a mention that Barclays have moved into a new office space, but again, that's not a net gain for the whole of BCP. That's just businesses moving in and around. My question regarding the management of the flexible working space, I think is the one condition that I would like to see changed and perhaps strengthened. I have been using over the last couple of years these types of pay as you go, rent a desk type things. I don't do it in Bournemouth anymore because we've got loads of spare desks in the town hall now, so I use those. And I'd commend this application. I think it's going to be an asset to the Lansdowne and to wider Bournemouth and to the whole cityscape. It wouldn't be appropriate anywhere else in my view. I hear what Councillor Carl Brown has said about the affordability test, and yeah, it gets my goat too. manager, a number of councillors here, but it's catering to a different market. It is as I think the architect said, it's that sort of buy to rent, maybe younger professionals and graduate or recent graduates, as Bournemouth University have made in their comment about graduate retention. We're not talking about, you know, a sustainable community as some of us might understand it, as a, you know, mixture of families and young people all in the same village. This is a different type of working. I raised a question about cycling provision and the allocation, and I agree with the officer that, you know, our SPD is aimed not at these large scale developments. It's aimed at the small developments where you get you're aiming to provide, you know, a sufficient amount of cycle spaces. I don't think everybody in every bedroom is going to want a bike, and I think pragmatic approach to provide 5/8 of the requirement, I think is reasonable in this case. So, you know, I think that goes. So the two points of debate that we've got here around the CS8, I think the officer's made a fantastic point on that one. The other one, I think condition 19 needs strengthening up on the management plan of the open space. But otherwise, that I'm broadly supportive. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. Well, funnily enough, I agree with nearly everything that Councillor Tarling has just said, with a couple of exceptions. My daughter lives in a building block almost identical to this in London, and it works. It works, it ticks the boxes, it does what it says on the can. And whilst I personally am not a big fan of the look of it, I do think it's necessary and it's what the town needs. And I think that if it is effective in retaining or attracting young professionals or young or any professionals, any people to come into our town and live here and work here, then that has to be a good thing. I think that the internal specification has been very well thought out, very well planned. I like the amenity, the lovely green area outside. I'm not a big fan of the way it looks on the outside. It's a bit concretey for me, but you know, everybody's taste is different. But by and large, I think it's quite a positive development. I'm not too worried about the bicycle provision because I think that transport, public transport in this area is so good. I don't see it as being such a big issue. But by and large, yeah, I think it's quite a good positive thing. I wouldn't be too happy in promoting the water feature as a play area for children, purely because I think it is too close to a road, and I don't think it would be a safe environment for a play to be promoted as a play area for children. So, but yeah, otherwise I'm keen to support it.
Thank you. And Councillor Adams.
Yeah, echo what these two guys have said. I would talk for quite a while, but Michael did enough of that for all of us. He raised all the points I made and more. I'm broadly happy to propose it, and if my Councillor Tarling, sorry, wants to suggest some change in the condition to condition 19, I'd be happy if he uses his wordsmith ways, but I'm happy to propose it. I think it's great, and as one of the probably target market, just about, I think it's brilliant.
So are you seconding this or not at this stage?
I appreciate Councillor Adams and thank you for the offer to second it. Yes, I will second it, but I'm happy to hear other councillors debate for seconding. Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yeah.
To defer reserve.
We have a motion proposed but not yet seconded. Hold, that's all.
Can we listen to the rest of the debate before coming back to that? Thank you.
I think I'm happy with that because we're at a very early stage in the debate. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you. I want to come back to the business of potentially making changes to conditions and things, because we talked about not doing that earlier, so maybe now's the time. And just to go back to condition 17, which we did briefly talk about just now, on sustainability and energy. I just think it's not a huge point, but I just think the language might need to be slightly clarified. So is that something I can suggest at this point? Is that okay? So it just says that measures to secure the minimum energy saving requirements of policy CS2. Now, forgive me if I'm getting myself muddled up. I think CS2 talks about the 10% from renewable energy generation. So energy saving isn't quite the right term. And I think we do need to be a bit more precise and make sure the language is clear as to what we're asking them to do. It's provision of 10% of the energy demand of the building from renewable energy is not the same as saving energy. Sorry if that's a pedantic point.
That is the normal wording, 10%. Yeah.
No, but it's, sorry, I'm not being clear. So the wording in the condition is measures to secure the minimum energy saving requirements. But my understanding is of policy CS2 is that that's around the percentage of the energy usage of the building that comes from renewable energy, which is not energy saving, it's energy generation. So it seems muddled to me.
Yeah, I mean, I've queried this before on a brand new building. How can you say you're saving energy because you've got no standard to measure it against?
To be clear what we're talking about in the condition as well. Yeah.
Councillor Tarling.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a bit of advice as it is part of my day job, or has been part of my day job. This I do think that the planning guidance is probably less onerous than the changes in Part L of the building regulations on energy performance of buildings. So that hence we are all finding that if you're building a new building, you've got to have things like air source heat pumps and measures like that, and U values of windows, solar gain is all considered as part of the energy modelling of buildings, and therefore I think the core strategy, although it's very important, has probably been overtaken by recent changes in Part L of the building regulations.
Okay, but I bow to your superior knowledge, Councillor Tarling, although I have a master's in this too. My understanding of the policy is that the policy is 10% of the energy usage of the building to be met from renewable energy. That's the policy we're talking about. So my query is that the language being used there around energy saving is just not right. It's not clear, and I think it would be better if it referred to what the policy actually is talking about, please, if that's okay.
Yes, is this a change? It's feasible.
Yes, thank you, Chair. In short, yes, I think we could. We'll come on if in due course we get to talk about conditions in the round. We're obviously making notes about various comments on various conditions. But taking Councillor's point, very, very quickly thinking off the top of my head, you would remove a short section of the sentence that to secure the minimum energy saving, and you would probably pick up some of the wording from CS2, which, as the councillor said, will require that at least 10% of the energy to be used, drawn from decentralised. So in theory, yes, we can change the language.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to enter the debate? Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I would agree with the comments made earlier that I think it's just what Bournemouth needs. It's giving it a sort of cityscape and providing lots of housing. It will liven up that area quite a bit. The only thing I would like to see, as it's nothing to do with the planning, but looking to open up more walkways. So, for example, to get to Asda, they'd have to go to the end of Oxford Road and along a bit, and it would be nice to see bridges over things in the future. I think just if you're going to have a car-free place to live, think about pedestrians a little bit more. That's what I was going to say. But otherwise, it's great.
Councillor Rice.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I appreciate the 3D details on the building frontage. It's important for the health of the population to look at interesting buildings. So, for example, that beautiful building that I'm looking at now. and it is proven to have health benefits to the population. So I wouldn't want us as a committee to be encouraging plain unhealthy buildings. The cycle parking, I'm very pleased that Transportation have refused this application based on that. I appreciate the balance that the planning officer has applied. Looking at the percentage of bicycles that people own in places where they have successfully introduced cycling as a normal form of transportation and a safe form of transportation, there is more than one bike per resident in those places. So 1.2 bikes per person. So this is including children. So potentially a huge under provision in this particular block. But there are other things that cycle provision that can be provided on street in the future, such as street cycle hangers in the future. So I wouldn't refuse this application on that aspect. An issue with our own planning guidance is that there's no mention of the building materials actually being sustainable or low carbon in themselves. There may be something in building regulations, but nothing very strict. So I would love if this building was made from hemp, for example. People laugh, but there are, it is easy to build with hemp now. So that would be lovely to see. And then the water play, if there are any concerns about road danger, then I think we need to sort out the road. Children should not be deprived of play. It is their human right to be able to play, and something that I feel very, very strongly about. But if there were concerns and it was preventing a condition on this, then maybe we could consult urban design team. There's plenty of things that can be done. For example, a bench between the water play area and the road, for example, that reduces any risk. But I wouldn't want that to prevent this being a condition for play. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more comments? Okay, well, we have a motion, not yet seconded.
Yes, I'm happy to second with the proposer's agreement that we add in to condition 19 that the applicant agrees a management plan with the planning officer for the operation of that, and that management plan would seek to allow public use of this space, and that an operator would be bound to that, and that it ensures by some way. I'm quite happy to delegate to our officers the wording of this, but the intention would be to ensure that it is going to be used as a flexible sort of drop-in working space, as I think agreed. Obviously, also to amend the paragraph in condition 17, as Councillor Salmon, the wording as again just been discussed, that we amend that, and that we seek an additional condition to the play area, and again wording to be agreed with the officer, that's appropriate, bearing in mind the wishes of Councillor Rice and all the councillors that we consider the safety aspects and the play aspects. I would bear in mind though that there's a lot of student flats around there, and I would wonder about the age of the children that will be playing in that water feature, having been a student.
As you mentioned before, it's for adults as well.
If the proposer, if Councillor Adams is happy with those, then I'm happy to second.
Fine, brilliant, great.
Yeah, I'm going to have a bit of a say, because I get the feel of the meeting, but I have to say that I'm not entirely happy with everything. I was very concerned. It's already been mentioned by, I think, by one councillor, that so many issues in the report. It there are concerns or transportation think it should be refused, or heritage are not happy, or it doesn't fulfill CS8 and so on. But in every case, yes, it doesn't meet these requirements, but it's okay because, and I'm very happy that sometimes, you know, on a limited number of issues, there's a more greater material reasons to accept than reject. But when they're so cumulative, it does set slight alarm bells ringing with me. As a person who hates heights, I do not like a building that high. I would hate to think I'd got to go anywhere near the top of it, but I realise I'm not necessarily, probably even in the majority on that. And a totally personal anecdote. My daughter actually works in this area, quite near the Helm, and when she heard about this, a friend sent it to her on her phone. I mean, it wasn't me. She was absolutely horrified. She said, "Oh, the buildings around here, they're only about 15 stories, and that's high enough." So, but again, you know, it's obviously a family trait. But I get the mood of the meeting that on the whole, people are very happy to accept this. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, can I just respond to your specific points? Firstly, yeah, hear absolutely what you're saying about, you know, the height of the building, your thoughts about that, and in my experience, when you're in cities, you only look at the bottom 10 stories, and you know the impact of tall buildings is either for the people in them that have got fantastic views from the penthouses, or it's from people in the surrounding areas. And the mention that the Councillor Hill, or question Councillor Hilliard had asked about the conservation areas, and most of them are inward looking, as mentioned by officers here. You know, so the impact of this on that is quite different. The impacts from the sea and, you know, the air festival and tall buildings is something very different. But yeah, no, hear what you say, Madam Chair, and I understand your points. But the balance on this, it's 400. We have a real housing issue in BCP, and even with a reduced housing requirement, this is still 400 units for potentially young people, and getting on the, okay, this might be a lot of buy to let, but you know, the tenure of houses going forwards, this country has been predicated on home ownership, and this might not be, you know, maybe it's indicative of the change of maybe to a more European style of living.
Thank you. So I don't see any other hands up. We have a motion. It's been seconded. We now have 3 proposed conditions, or rather changes to conditions, not additional conditions. Mr. Gould.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Sorry to butt in there. If I may just do a sort of bit of pulling it together in housekeeping just before members go to the vote. To be honest, Councillor Tarling has pretty much done my job for me, so he's given an excellent summary of the debate. But just to recap, because the important thing here, Chair, if I can refer members to para 239 of the report, which sets out the recommendation to grant, it talks about the following conditions. Now, obviously, the debate as it's ebbed and flowed this morning has sought to alter some of the wording to condition, for example, Councillor Rice mentioned the inclusion of an interactive water feature, and that would require some amendment to condition 11. Councillor talked about condition 17 and the renewable energies. We would need to alter some of the wording as I sort of rehearsed a few moments ago. And then we've also got condition 19 that Councillor Tarling has raised around the management of the office space. We actually feel that the requirement for a management plan would probably sit better in a separate condition that specifically then supplements condition 19. So I would ask members to consider if they're happy to have an additional condition that requires a management plan to supplement the requirements of condition 19. Where I'm leading to on all of this is that the wording there needs to change, because obviously it's just at the moment talks about the following conditions, and we've just talked about changing some of those conditions or adding. So Mr. Firth has been busy drafting some alternative wording, and if I can just come to that. Essentially, what we would be asking is that we amend A, where it says the following, to read, following conditions together with power being delegated to the head of planning, brackets including any interim, to consider and determine wording A for a further condition and reasons to secure the submission, approval and ongoing maintenance of a plan setting out the management of the proposed co-working office space. So that's the additional condition to supplement 19. To amend condition 17 to better reflect the requirements of policy CS2 of the core strategy, and C to amend condition 11 to also require details to be submitted, approved regarding the proposed landscaping, how it could be designed to secure the provision of facilities for children. And then specific mention of an interactive water provision. So, Chair, if you're happy with all of that, and the last thing I would say is obviously that the recommendation, you know, if members are minded to approve the application, it's still subject to completion of the Section 106 agreement.
Yeah.
Chair, just note that I think Mr. Gould said one word. He said approval and ongoing management of a plan setting out the management of proposed co-working spaces, actually implementation, but that's a minor word issue.
Thank you. So we've got those amended or proposed amendments to conditions. We have a motion proposed and seconded. So now, and the proposal, the motion is to accept with these changes and amendments to the conditions. If you are happy to proceed on that basis, will you show now, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Thank you. Are those against? And abstentions? Yeah. That doesn't add up. That doesn't add up.
Can we just do it again, please? Sorry. So all
those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Right. Thank you. It does add up. Right. Thank you, everybody. We've had a long session. I suggest we take a very quick toilet break, comfort break, not necessarily for toilet, and come back at 12 o'clock. So welcome back for the next item on planning committee today, which is the Prom Diner Undercliff Drive, Bournemouth, item 6B. So I'll hand over to the case officer, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chair and members. Let me just get set up. Is that okay? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can see that.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application for a seasonal beach deck close to Boscombe Pier. Very similar to an application that we had a couple of committees to go for the Sandpiper Cafe on the West Cliff. We consider there are some differences, and I'll come to those later. But just to give you an idea of location, it's close to Boscombe Pier, just to the west of Boscombe Pier. There's an existing cafe there. The proposal is to provide a decked area, as you can see, on the beach, which would be ancillary to the main cafe. Here's an aerial photograph of it. The Prom Diner, as you can see, is on the left-hand side there, and the proposed decking is actually going to be where that, I think it looks like to me as though it might be a bouncy castle or something that's there temporarily in the summer. This is a more detailed view of it. It's a decked area, which is the L-shaped area at the top of the screen here. There's a proposed kiosk here, which they will be using for storage, so they can store away all the tables and chairs in the evening. And there's a sand area, and on the sand area, which is enclosed, there'll be some cabanas, some parasols, tables and chairs. As I say, it'll be ancillary to the main cafe, which has seating areas, so it's quite a well-used and large seating area. So this will be an ancillary area to it. Here's an elevation, and you can see that it's mainly open, although on the right-hand side there you can see you've got the storage container. We weren't happy with their original submission, and they have taken away quite a few of the structures that were originally proposed, and we're left now with the main structures are the kiosk here, and we're proposing, or they're proposing, to put a vinyl wrap around it to make it look more attractive, and there's this sort of gateway entrance to it. Here's a 3D CGI visual, gives a bit more of an idea of what it'll look like. It's the other view of it, and this is a photograph of what it was like in the summer. They did go ahead and carry out the works. It's now all been completely removed because it's the winter. The proposal is only for the summer, and you can see it's we weren't happy with the way that the kiosks projected onto the sand and into the beach area, and they've now proposed to move it close to where that upright surfboard is. Here's another photograph from the beach, and you can see that it's a decked area, which is enclosed with this rope and post enclosure. There's another photograph there. Again, we weren't happy with the amount of structures, and they've removed they're not proposing to go ahead with this timber pergola in the middle of the site, or these covered cabanas, just to try and keep it much more open. The issues that we went through before were the principle of beach decking on the sand, the visual appearance, impact on amenity, and technical issues about the sea and sea wall. You may ask why we're proceeding with this application when the committee refused the last one. Well, I think there are some key differences here, and we think that the key differences are that in this part of the beach, this would be the only deck. It would be the only deck between Bournemouth Pier and Boscombe Pier, so it's quite a wide stretch. With the Sandpiper, there were already 3 other decks. There was one at the West Beach Cafe, one at the Chineside, and one at Rockwater, which is further along towards Poole. So we think that's a That's a key difference. We think the environment's different here as well. This part of the Prom is actually a road and a car park, and it's not quite as tranquil and unspoilt and natural as the Westcliff site. Also, this deck area is slightly smaller. The Sandpiper, it was 35 meters by 16. This is 30 by 15, so it is slightly smaller. And also this time, and it was an issue that a member raised before, they've submitted a litter management plan, and they are proposing to have a litter management plan which obviously deals with the waste on the site, but also clearing up any waste that gets strewn from this actual development. Although they've put in a commitment to do that, I'm recommending a condition that we look at that in much more detail, because we want to know the numbers of people that are out there collecting, how often they're going to do an inspection, and so on. So, Chair, that's my presentation. If you've got any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Before we come on to questions, we've got a councillor wishing to speak from outside the committee who will be objecting. So we'll have his objection first, and then we'll come on to questions. Okay? Sorry, correction, it's 2 councillors wishing to speak. So shall we start with the first one to register, which is Councillor Bartlett?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, members, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to address the committee this afternoon. Firstly, I'd like to thank my Head of Planning Services for bringing this application to the committee. It is my view that all such applications should be brought to the committee, as all beachfront developments are in the wider public interest. I'd like to refer to the officer's report. At paragraph 7, the relevant planning applications and appeals references 2 approved applications and 1 refused application. It fails to mention 2 more applications that were refused in December 2022, primarily because of the loss of public open space, as was the West Beach Cafe refused by this committee fairly recently. Paragraph 27, the report acknowledges policy CS31, which states that planning permission will be refused for developments that results in the loss of public open space. Approving this application will be in direct contravention of this policy, upheld on 3 prior similar applications. The report suggests that for part of the year, the open space will be available. However, the policy does not provide for such interpretation. Paragraph 30 justifies the development on the basis of earlier development at Urban Reef in Boscombe, on the basis that it is a decking area only. The report does not mention the ugly sea container located on top of the decking area, which certainly does not add to the character and appearance of the area. Paragraph 33 justifies the development in the summer because the structure will not be noticeable from other beach paraphernalia. It is difficult to understand how a parasol can be compared to a sea container. I do not agree that the design accords with policy CS41, and in my view, it is directly contrary to policy CS41. Paragraph 36, loss of open space, and this is my main objection. For decades, the beach open space has been considered as sacrosanct, and this is the purpose of policy CS31, to protect this space. This application and several others seeks to commercially exploit these spaces and create entitled, not entitled spaces on public spaces. I'm totally opposed to this. Paragraph 39 of the report states that there is no loss of amenity for household residents, but makes no comment of the loss of visual amenity for people using the beach or the promenade due to the sea container blocking views along the beach and to the sea. If you look at part 2 of the design and access statement, it says the design intention is to provide a scheme which relates to an Ibiza beach bar theme. This is contrary to policy CS6, which requires development to enhance the features that contribute to each place's character, heritage and local distinctiveness. This is Bournemouth and not Ibiza. If you look at the CGI, which you've just seen at the Prom Diner, you will see the sunbeds on the area. Just you can see where this type of development on the beach is heading. So in summary, 2 sites have been approved, but 3 have been refused and others not yet applied for. The administration says the seafront strategy is being reviewed. And in view of the conflict between different decisions from different planning officers, I would suggest that if you are unable to refuse this application today, that the decision is deferred until clarity is given via the revised seafront strategy, which is currently being worked on. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett, and we have Councillor Canavan as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I find myself in a situation where I completely agree with Councillor Bartlett, and we also agreed similarly when we considered the Sandpiper application back in September. I think Councillor Bartlett has adequately referred to the policies which I believe this application is in contravention of, and it strikes me that we've had that debate in September, which I thought was a good debate, and we were given, I think, a reasonably fair warning by members of planning department that the decision in September could create a precedent. Well, thank you. That was great, because we do have to have a consistent policy. And I believe that it is important to maintain the integrity of the beach as a public open space for the reasons that Councillor Bartlett has outlined. So again, I find myself in a situation where I am agreeing with him and believe this application should be refused.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan. So now we do come on to questions. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to clarify something, sorry if it's me not reading carefully enough, but I'm not totally sure if there is anything would remain on the beach outside the summer months, because I think when we talked about the last application, there was decking would remain, but and I'm sometimes when I read bits of this report, I thought decking would remain, and sometimes I thought it wouldn't. So could we just have some clarification on that, please? Thank you.
Chair, yes, if I can clarify that point. The applicant has completely removed everything at the moment. So their intention is during the winter that everything will go. When I was dealing with it before and in relation to the Sandpiper, in my view, I felt that it was reasonable to keep the decking there during the winter period, just the decking alone. So the condition reflects what I think is appropriate, but if the applicant wishes to remove it all, then that's fine as well.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chair. I just completely forgot what I was going to say.
Chair, if I can remind Councillor Hilliard, because
if there's anyone else asking questions. Sorry, Mr. Davis, I spoke over you.
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, I was. I know in the briefing meeting, Councillor here asked about the whether or not this was a franchise and whether or not the revenue for it, was going to the council. I did check with Seafront Services, and this is actually part of our in-house offer. So it's all the revenue for these beach operations, which I think is quite considerable, does go into the council revenue pot.
Thanks, Mr. Davis, for that. The other point I wanted to say was, obviously, it's been trading this season just gone. Do you have any details of how popular it was at all?
I don't. I'd imagine it must have been reasonably popular, otherwise they wouldn't be continuing with the planning application.
Thanks for that. Great.
Councillor Martin.
Notice the other change from the sandpiper application is this is actually on road fronts as well, because the cars are allowed out onto that part of the prom. I was going to ask about disabled access. Would there be disabled access to the decking area, and the existing cafe that's there now, does that have disabled access anyway? Yeah, probably for wheelchair users.
The let me just go back to the photographs. It is actually level with the prom. The as you can see, it is level with the prom. So as that photograph shows that it is accessible. I'm not quite sure about the existing cafe, whether or not they've got a ramp that goes up there, but certainly as you can see from that photograph, it's shown as accessible.
Yeah, it's level with the prom now, but the beach, the height of the sand on the beach just change. You know, when we have to keep topping the sand up. So over the years, actually the sand won't be level with the prom anymore. It will drop down by about 4 or 5 feet.
Yes, actually, if you look at the to the right here, can you see where my cursor is showing? That's actually a ramp, and there's one on the other side as well. So there is a gentle ramp that goes down to the beach, a gentle concrete ramp, and the intention will be, I'd imagine, if the sand levels do fluctuate and go up and down, that they'll set their deck at beach level, and the ramp that's there at the moment will serve that.
What about, so are there 2 ramps there, so that basically if they set their decking up with 1 ramp, how do disabled people who don't want to use that area but just want to get to the beach, how will they get to the beach?
There's 2 ramps, there's one each side.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's shown on the ramps there.
Mr. Davis, I've got a question. Can you clarify about dates? In condition 2, it's to be completely removed by the 19th, on or before the 19th of April 25. But we haven't got dates, as far as I can see, for start and end of the season next summer.
Let me just check there. I think, Chair, because it's a relatively short period, the reason that I put that condition on to for 2025 was because to coincide with the consents that we've given for the West Beach Cafe and Chineside.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just to help the debate, if you look at members look at condition 4 of the officer's recommendation, I believe that would deal with the 2024 season, because it says that the structures can only be there between the period up to 15th September following the 1st of May. So that would deal with next year. But then obviously condition 2 then bites in terms of the permission expiring and everything, by April 25.
Thank you, Mr.
That's
Gould.
right.
I hadn't read on far enough in the conditions. I'd only got as far as 2. I hadn't gone on to 4. Any more questions? Oh, Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just the container there. So is that going to be there all year? And I'm sure it was mentioned earlier. It's the shipping container being removed in the wintertime, right?
Yes, the containers will be removed during the winter period.
And is it possible for the shipping container to be clad in some way with a more appealing So that is being.
Chair, yes, we're proposing a condition that they're proposing to wrap it in a vinyl, and we want to see what that looks like to make sure it's appropriate for that location. So the shipping container will be wrapped in a vinyl wrap with an appropriate design for that location.
Yeah, I did read that. I was wondering whether sort of more like wood, clad in wood, as opposed to plastic. But
Yeah, I mean I know the proposal at the Chine side is that they do clad it in old timber, and that's one way of doing it, because it's only there for a short period. Well, it's only there during the summer period where it's perhaps a slightly different environment. I thought it was reasonable in this case to agree a vinyl wrap, but if members felt differently, then there's no reason why we couldn't change the condition to that point.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Adam.
Sorry, just a quickie. What's the purpose of the container? I sort of flipped through and I was confused myself. Is it just storage?
It's storage, yes.
Okay, so let's move on to debate now. On this, I think we've asked a few questions. I think this is the presentation is very clear. Councillor Tarling.
Yeah, thank you very much. We had a lot of debate on the previous application. I know we're considering this one, but it's been brought to us because of the previous application. I think I probably stated last time, and I think my view still, I agree with Councillor Bartlett on the principle of losing public amenity space, but in my mind, this is still public amenity. It is a public space for public to use. Councillor Bartlett mentioned ugly beach container. I actually like beach containers. I quite like the shabby chic look. And I think the idea of wrapping it in vinyl sounds absolutely abhorrent. Yeah, the plastic wrapping in a marine environment sounds absolutely just. I'd rather have a nice rusty shipping container to give that shabby chic, like Robinson Crusoe look, which I think is trying to probably engender. But that's an aesthetic thing, as a previous I've already stated in this meeting. My aesthetics may be different to other people. However, I really don't like the idea of a vinyl wrap. It gives me the idea of vinyl wraps on boy racers' cars and stuff like that. And albeit it's a temporary thing, I think it would look even shabbier, and bits of plastic peeling off in the sunshine and blowing down the beach is not my idea of appreciation. Following the previous meeting, I did actually have a brief conversation with Madam Mayor of Bournemouth regarding this, that we'd set a precedent previously in our refusal of the previous application. Not one I'd agree with, but what we're facing here is a dearth of planning policy here. And I hear what some of the previous speakers the councillors mentioned about a lack of policy and clear decision. But for my mind, and this is purely my opinion, and based on seeing what's happened further on the beach at Southbourne and in closer to my own ward in Christchurch at the Noisy Lobster, is that we as a tourist destination really need to up our offer. And okay, I'm not suggesting it's an Ibiza style rave thing, and I wouldn't want to see drum and bass music pumping out on the beach at any time. Well, I'm not a drum and bass fan, Councillor Carr. Bit of techno I'm okay with, but drum and bass or garage or grime, I really don't want to. Do you want grime? Do you want grime? Sorry, better than techno, is it? Okay. We differ in our musical tastes, obviously. However, what we're talking about here is offering a food and beverage offer. For my part, I think where you have a cafe and an area that we limit the amount of beach space we take up, but it's not unreasonable to assume a certain amount of beach space for sitting area for people. Like Councillor Master just mentioned, you disabled people that perhaps don't want to walk, or they can't walk down on the beach with cups of coffee. You're offering an alternative here for other people who want to enjoy the beach that perhaps aren't, sand lovers like myself. So I actually would support this application, as I supported the previous one, but
are very conscious that we do need to set a policy here on what we do about our beach offers and whereabouts we offer this. You know, it wouldn't be appropriate on Hengistbury Head, for example. Is it appropriate between the piers or close to the piers as an offer? I think it probably is, and I think part of our local strategy, and is why I was speaking to Councillor Filer about this, is that we need to set, and all the councillors involved with beach frontage areas need to really consider, you know, what we want as a unified policy here. So, you know, I hear what other councillors are saying, but I think we're really suffering from a lack of clear direction in our policy, and hopefully that's addressed in the local plan. Thank you.
I was just going to come in and point out that is, yes, we is not this committee. We don't do the setting. We can't. We just decide on what's in front of us. And since this is only for next summer at the moment, it's a very limited application. I've got Councillor Salmon, then Councillor Williams, then Councillor Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I also very much agree with Councillor Bartlett's points that he raised in his objection, but I do also agree with him that this is enclosing public space for and making it not available to the public, because this is a commercial. It will become a commercial space that you can only use, as with the last application, you can only use if you're purchasing something from a business, and I think it makes no difference who runs that business. That means that space has been enclosed and is not available to the public, so it is a loss of public open space. I take the point about providing facilities for people with less mobility to use the beach, and I think that's a very laudable thing that we should be doing, but we can do that without asking them to pay for a cup of tea, or indeed anything else. And I think that's the key difference here, and why I can't support anything like this on the sand. I think Councillor Bartlett raised a really good point about a precedent that we're setting. Where do we stop? If we say yes to some of them, why would we ever say no to any of them? And before we know it, do we end up enclosing the whole beach and making it not available for public use? So that's my big concern with this application, as with the last one.
So Councillor Williams, Councillor Adams, Councillor Clements, and then I'll come over to this side.
Thank you very much indeed. In a former life, I was the cabinet member for tourism for Bournemouth, and it was I that went and looked at the continent and saw what they were doing and brought back the idea of beachfront dining and cafes. So I obviously support it. I'd also like to point out that we do have things like this in public areas. The Lower Gardens, for example, has numerous cafes in it, as does the seafront on Bournemouth. I don't see the difference between Boscombe and Bournemouth, other than it's quieter. And this would actually encourage tourism to that area. So I'm in support of it.
Thank you, Councillor.
I agree with Councillor Williams and Tarling, with the exception of his comment about grime. I am a big grime fan, probably in the minority. I was also in the minority who voted in favour of the previous similar application, and so probably be somewhat hypocritical to not remain. So obviously there's 15 miles of golden lovely sand, and I like the idea of providing a range of options for sort of visitors and residents alike. I think I agree, going forward it'd be useful to have a concrete strategy to either designate sites or areas. It's a busier area than the one that was previously refused as well, I think. To come back on Councillor Salmon, I think you can say yes to some but not others, and we can use the consideration of where it is, i.e. proximity to piers, maybe proximity to the cliff lift or cliff lifts. And so I think we do have a scope to do that whilst we're waiting for something more concrete, which would be helpful. I might be shooting myself in the foot here being in favour of it, but I agree that I don't think we should in any way consider the ownership of the site. If it's a BCP site, I don't think it's right for those members who may be minded to refuse to reconsider on the grounds of, oh, well, it's going to create a load of cash for the council. I think we should treat each applicant equally, but that's my views.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, largely I agree with what's previously been said. I think in terms of tourism, we absolutely need facilities like these. I think we need it to be offering it as a service to our tourists, our visitors, our local residents. I think it's a service that could benefit such a lot of people. I think we have to keep it in perspective also, because it's really not a huge area of the beach that's being taken up here. And I think the value that it could contribute far outweighs any detriment at all to the area. I personally would like to see more of these popping up along the beach at various intervals. But I think that, you know, perhaps I'm in the minority, but in terms of tourism, our towns desperately need a boost.
Thank you. Now, anyone on this side? Right, we'll take them from the end. Councillor Martin, Councillor Sidaway, Councillor Gillett.
I do agree with Councillor Canavan and sorry, got the first one that we presented. I'm concerned about the wider public interest and the integrity of the beachfront. You know, losing that. I'm more worried about a floodgate thing. That if we allow one, where do we stop? You know, what do we? You know, when we allow some but not others, and then people can appeal because one was allowed and the other one wasn't. It just, I think, I agree that we do need some sort of policy for moving forward on this. I think the shipping container is going to be really ugly. I think it's going to look really, really bad. And my concern would be that if we allow this, other people are going to do the same thing with shipping containers. And we'll have 15 miles of shipping containers on our golden beaches. So I'm worried about the sunbed idea as well. That will, you know, I can see Councillor Clements when you're saying about we need to move forward and we need to compete with Europe. But we still are Bournemouth, and I don't want to see where you know, the whole beach full of sunbeds, and you've got to pay to sit on those sunbeds.
Councillor Martin, that is not proposed, and that is not part of what we're looking at today.
Okay, sorry, yeah, but yeah, I'm more worried about the loss of public amenity, particularly as it gets crowded.
Well, I wasn't at the previous one. That was a meeting I missed. But when I read the minutes, I was a little surprised that it got turned down. I'm definitely in favour of it. My concern really is, I'm picking up on Councillor Tarling's point about you couldn't have it in Hengistbury Head. I think you could. I think it depends what it looks like. If it's a brutalist shipping container, then you probably can't. With grime music, you probably can't. But I think what it looks like is really important. And I think if you had a more Robinson Crusoe shack, that might fit at Hengistbury Head, might look a bit odd on Bournemouth Beach. So I think what it looks like is important. I agree about the vinyl wrapping. I think that would be a shame. And the suggestion about wood, making it look more natural as though it fitted on the beach, I think would be where I would head with that. So I'd like to see something in the condition that perhaps specified, made it a little bit harder not to get something that was sympathetic to the area.
Yeah, and Councillor Gillett.
Yeah, I think it's materially different to the previous application. There's very few facilities in that area. I think there's a gym on the beach gym that is seasonal as well. It's not permanent unlike the other one, so it will be wrapped up at the end of the year. And I think in terms of will it set a precedent? Well, we can stop at one. You know, you don't have to. You can say, well, there's enough space for there to be one on that beach, but there wouldn't necessarily need to be more. There's very few places along the promenade where there is disabled access, and that is one of them. And I think there's specially designed beach huts for people who are disabled along that area as well. So if anything, I'd want more of imposition of conditions with disabled access, and maybe even access going down onto the beach as well to allow people to do that. But apart from that, I'm relatively supportive.
Thank you. I was just going to hop in and since we haven't had one yet, make a proposal that we accept this. A move that we propose it. But over to Councillor Hilliard and then Councillor Carl Brown.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say that a seafront strategy was formed in 2022. This was after public consultation in 2021, and essentially it broke down the coast into 18 distinct areas, and between the piers is called the central beaches, and through public feedback, this was the area where it was designated vibrant and commercial zone at the heart of the seafront. Opportunity to curate the very best in hospitality, culture and eventing the town has to offer. My ward of Muddyford, the residents didn't want that. It's essentially a natural beach, and it's saying a more relaxed pace for family and traditional holidays. And looking at the different 18 areas, again, the Chines is mentioned as a firm favourite for families to escape the hustle and bustle. So I think the coast is long and different areas dictate different needs. And I think this between the piers can accommodate this type of structure. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Carver.
It's fine. I'll be very quick. I am supportive of this. I think ultimately the beach for us is a commercial operation in lots of ways. It is obviously a public amenity and it is natural space, but it's not a natural beach, as if I remember correctly. It is created to be a tourist attraction. And I think that this forms a relatively small part, or very small part, of a potential offer to those tourists. I think that alongside we should consider increased disabled access to the sea, not just to the beach, but to the sea. And the only thing that does concern me, because I'm not sure that that's actually been completely answered yet, as to whether the decking is to be removed completely in winter.
My understanding is that
not
it
my
is.
reading exactly that it has to be.
My understanding is that it is, but
no, my understanding of what was said this morning, or this afternoon even, was that it is currently removed, and the condition is that it can be removed. What I don't have is it must be removed. I would be more interested in it being removed, and I think it would actually hugely help the decking because it will get considerably weathered over the winter, and it will deteriorate much more quickly. So I would be interested in perhaps amending some condition so that it should be removed in the winter.
Mr. Davies, can you clarify condition 4, because it does say apart from the decking area, everything should be removed. But I understood from your presentation that it included the decking area.
That's right, Chair. The councillor has got it exactly right. The condition says that it can be removed, but because my view is that leaving the decking there during the winter is actually a facility that might benefit people who use the beach, because they'll be able to sit on the beach and use it when the cafe is not using it. But there's no reason why, if members feel like it, that they can modify my condition and say that the decking shall be removed, because in fact the applicant in this case has removed it this winter.
Okay, so I made a motion for that we accept the proposal. I haven't yet got a seconder. Is there anyone willing to second? Oh, I've got 2 hands now. I think Councillor Adams was on the last one, so let's have Councillor Williams on this one. Before we go to the vote, Mr. Gould wants to add something.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of housekeeping again as we move towards the vote. If members are going to move to support the officer's recommendation and grant the application, then there has been, as part of the discussion originally raised by Councillor Rice in respect of condition 8 of the officer's report, which deals with the design of the cladding of the container ship that is to be there during the season. I think there's an expression from members, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that they're not overly enamoured with the use of vinyl. So the suggestion would be that we alter the wording of that condition, something along the lines of details of the design and materials of the proposed cladding or to be used on the external surface of the proposed container, And maybe we might be so brave as to say there's been an intimation that a more natural material such as wood would be preferable. So we'd look to capture that in the condition, and I'm going to come on to what Rob's itching to talk about. So we'd seek clarification that members want to actually alter the wording of that condition. Mr. Davies has clarified the point that was raised by Councillor about the decking. Absolutely right, that the wording of the condition at the moment does suggest that the decking could be retained. The reality is it has been removed for this winter. And Mr. Davies has outlined the reasons why he felt it was acceptable to retain the decking during the winter. The last point is to come, again, it's a bit of housekeeping technicality that we covered on the previous application at paragraph 52, where the recommendation is set out. It says to the following conditions. Obviously, there's been talk about amending those conditions. And so we would just need to tweak the wording of that to say something along the lines of the following conditions subject to power being delegated to the head of planning, including any interim, to amend condition 8 to require details to be submitted, approval of materials provided, and thereafter at all times retain that will provide a more natural appearance, which does not include vinyl, submitted and approved of materials. Yeah, so I think that probably covers it off, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, so we've got, if I'm happy as mover to accept those conditions, is my seconder? Yes. Then we come on to condition 4, whether we want to insist that decking is removed or whether we're happy with the wording as it stands. Councillor Adams.
I'm not sure about personally the removal of the decking outside of the season, because it does offer a potential benefit to those specifically in wheelchairs. Because if you've got a standard wheelchair, so it's often you can't get through on the sand, and you need a special one with sort of big wheels. So it gives people an option who might not otherwise be able to sit sort of surrounded by the sand rather than on the prom, which isn't the most attractive thing. But that was just something I thought I'd throw out there for others to consider.
My concern with leaving it is that given how the sand blows around, that it could be partly concealed or entirely concealed, and it could be a serious trip hazard for people walking along there. That would be my concern, and I can see one or two heads nodding in agreement with that. So I would be inclined to say that we continue with this winter's practice, and that we insist that it is removed. If my seconder is nodding, is everybody happy that we insist that it is removed, that the condition is amended in those
Did we
terms?
put a condition in that they have to maintain it? They have to like sweep it every week, or I don't know. I'm asking. Can we do that? If they leave it,
that wouldn't meet the tests.
Right. I have a little voice whispering in my ear that doesn't meet the test. But I mean, they're going to, in any the serious commercial operation is not one to have their environment all messy. They're going to want it good, aren't they? I would have thought. But we've got to. There's more from Mr. Gould.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. So a little bit confusion around condition 4, certainly for me. The condition as it's currently worded says that apart from the decking, all other structures. It also says excluding tables and chairs, so in theory they remain, shall be removed from the site. Am I to conclude that actually members would prefer all structures, tables, chairs, everything removed?
Yeah, as it is now.
Okay,
yes,
so we can, yeah, you know, if that's where members are going, we can obviously provide alternative wording to say that everything shall go. The last point, Chair, from myself is it goes back to the beginning of the debate when there was reference to previous applications for similar decking and associated structures, and I think specific mention of sandpiper. I think it's important for the record that if members are going to vote to support this application or grant it, then that they recognise that there are differences, and Mr. Davies outlined, you know, in his assessment how he feels that this site differs from those other sites. So, for example, there was reference to a number of other decking structures on the beach further to the west, no other structures between the two piers, and the context of around, you know, the relationship to the road, the car park, and so on. So I think it's important that members acknowledge and recognise those differences for the record. Thank you.
Hopefully that can be minuted in some way. Mr. Sidway.
I just wanted to question the differences between 2 and 4, because I don't understand why, if in 4 we're saying it's all going to be removed on a certain date in September, 2 then says everything should be removed by the 19th of April 25. And I don't want to allow a gap for someone to say yes, but in that one it says I didn't have to, so therefore they don't do anything. And so I just want to understand why that was.
I think Mr. Davies has sort of explained that already, but perhaps he can come back now.
He explained that it was like, because it was like it for the other ones, but it seems in direct contradiction to clause 4 is my concern.
Chairman, yes, if I could clarify that point. What we're saying is that we're only prepared to give temporary consent for this development. We don't want to give an open-ended consent for forever. So we're saying that it should only be there for a limited period, and I've made that limited period until 2025 to coincide with the other decks that we've given consent for. And then there's a separate condition which says that during the winter period, in effect, all of the decking has to be removed. Although I think we're now modifying it to say that all the decking has to be removed. So there are 2 separate conditions there, Chair.
Yeah, just to come back on that, if I may, it's the use of the word removal in clause 2 that is the wrong word, in my opinion, because it's already been removed back in September.
What I'm going to ask
permission.
the officers is whether it could be spelt out, maybe as a condition, that the permission hereby granted applies to the season 2024 only.
Thanks, Chair. I think what this suggestion is that we would probably supplement some wording into condition 2 to say that the use shall cease, and then all of the associated structures, containers, etc., will be removed on or before the 19th of April 2025.
Yeah, sorry, just to come in on that. So I'll pick up on 2 points. So first of all, just to be clear, what we talk about here is adding a further delegation to the head of planning or the interim to deal with these changes. The second thing is, I think points being made at what we could do is amend condition 2 to say something that the use will cease and any remaining structures, in case there are any. If they've already gone, then any remaining means won't be adversely affected by that.
It doesn't clause condition 4 say they must have gone.
It should have done, but there's just it's a belt and braces wording. So you could just say cease the use because of these options.
You're the legal expert. As long as it doesn't leave a sort of window for them to come through and say, "Oh, I'm just going to leave that there for the winter."
I think, Chair, then members are prepared to say
that's your concern.
They're delegating power to the head of planning or the interim to look at conditions 2 and 4, make sure they dovetail together to make sure that the use and all the stuff is removed, as we've discussed.
Right, I think we've made our concerns and wishes very clear. Let's hope. I'm sure the officers will correctly interpret them. So, therefore, can we please put that to the vote now? The motion has been moved and seconded that we grant the permission on the basis that in the report with these amendments. Thank you for the word. Amendments to certain of the conditions. So, those in favour, please vote now.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Those against?
2, 3.
3. And therefore, if my maths is right, there are no abstentions, but just checking.
That's great.
No abstentions. Thank you. So that closes this morning's agenda. We reconvene at 1:30, and remember that's in confidential, so it will be limited people here, but of course the committee will be here.
Do we not need to vote? Do we not need to vote on that?
Yeah, we could do, yes. So, well, I've got to find the wording. Thank you. No, because it's been publicised as 1:30. There will be people arriving. So, if we deal with the exclusion of the press and public, that under section 100 brackets A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 5 in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding the information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So if we could vote now, those in favour of excluding the press and public for the next item, please vote.
Emma, yes, I would have appreciated being able to speak.
So do you abstain, Councillor?
No, I'm voting against.
Okay.
I do not agree that it is in the public benefit.
So I'll just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Those against?
1, 2, 3.
And again, I think that means no abstentions. Thank you. So we have now